Hello and welcome back to the Scale Modelling Cafe and the final part in the Eduard Bf 109F in 1/72 scale. You would have just seen me there with some metal prep from VMS. This gets painted onto the photo etch parts before the primer, and I'm using my usual Mr. Surfacer 1500. This is all thinned with levelling thinner from Mr. Hobby. So all the parts are getting primed, all the bits of resin, the canopy, which has had a coat of RLM 66, and then the model is prepared by just wiping down with a bit of alcohol. That'll just get rid of any fingerprints and oils and things like that. Then the primer is sprayed in light even coats all over the airframe, and it goes down beautifully smooth. Now, I don't necessarily think that you have to prime, especially with a model with this beautifully fine surface detail. However, you know, it doesn't do any harm as long as it goes down really nice and thin and smooth. Maybe just over the seams to check them and over the resin and photo etch parts. Now for the yellow markings, so they were given an undercoat of MRP white. This will make the yellow go down much easier and it'll be a brighter colour. The yellow I used is again MRP, but it's not RLM04, it's Swedish yellow, which is much lighter and paler. However, what I do is I mix it to an RLM04 shade by just adding a tiny bit of red. The Swedish yellow is more akin to the I think it's RLM, I think it's RLM 22 or 27, I forget now, of the markings, which you can tell they're on the decal sheet. They are paler, which is mainly correct, although I have seen some evidence to say some of the markings in theatre were painted in RLM04 as well. So going on with the fuselage band, in hindsight I wouldn't again do the top of the band. The reason this is the winter whitewash over the top, because it's much darker either side, the white did struggle. So what I ended up doing is just overspraying the top of the yellow with a little bit of one of the greys, whichever one it was, and then go white over the top. Now the oil cooler there under the nose, it fits so well you don't really need any glue, so you could leave that off, and I did that in the other one I did, which you'll see right at the very end. This all gets a little bit of a polish just with an extremely well-worn sanding sponge. I've had this for well over 10 years. Now for the RLM 76, again I'm using MRP. So this is laid down in a very nice light opaque coat once all the yellow areas have been masked off. Not forgetting the fuselage sides, although I am doing the winter whitewash, so it was a bit of a waste of time, but it's a good chance to practice your modelling later on. Now I need to come in and break up the colour a little bit, so adding some white, I went in and I did some fading. So concentrating along some of the panel lines and the different sort of areas. I highlighted the panel lines in the lighter colour and did a sort of random motley pattern, sometimes quite tight, sometimes quite cloudy. The aim of this really is to make it look completely sort of randomized, and also a little bit of darker as well, just going in. It just helps to break it all up, and you might think this is a little bit exaggerated, and that is done on purpose because the subsequent varnish layers and weathering will tone it all back down again. The top colours, both of them, the 74 and the 75, again, both MRP. But I didn't bother fading it because there's no point, because this is going to be a winter whitewash. So this is the RLM 75 going down. It's important actually to get the wing roots right though, because the winter whitewash will be worn off on the wing root. And again, just nice light even coats in the rough pattern. You can see it's very soft, doesn't matter, because we're going to go in with the 74 now. The mottling, you can see how close I am. The air pressure is as low as you can go without it speckling. So the paint is still atomising properly, but it is not blasting out. If you blast it out, you can, if you're not careful, if the airbrush just sort of stagnates, you can actually clean the area with the paint. But I did quite a dense cloudy mottle on the fuselage sides. Now the 74, again freehand. I'm actually doing quite a tight demarcation line. Again, just for practice really. Didn't really need to do this because, like I say, most of this is going to get covered up with the white, but you know, might as well take the practice while we can. Keep our hand in. And you can see there how tight you can get the spray pattern. If I was doing this not in a winter whitewash scheme, I wouldn't do this freehand. I would probably mask it, because most photos show, if not a hard edge, an extremely tight demarcation, which in 70-second scale is going to look all but sharp anyway. And again, the mottling, just a little bit underneath the windscreen. Now I've removed the cap here, or rather I couldn't be bothered putting the cap back on. I think if I was going to do this cloudy effect and it was all going to be on show, then I'll probably put the cap back on again. In fact, the cap is on. What am I talking about? So I did the right thing, there we go, brilliant. Now for the fun bit, the whitewash. So just some hairspray. Directly sprayed into the airbrush, and you can see all the little bubbles. So what I do is I just blow back a little bit of air. That just helps to degas it. And then just a few light even coats of the hairspray just go straight on over the whole airframe. You can see it's quite glossy, which is an advantage, because you can use the sort of shininess of it as a demarcation from the paint, just to see exactly where you've sprayed. The swastika on this aeroplane was masked off, so I actually cut out the swastika from the decal sheet, and using a blob of blue tack, that was just put in place, and then I could go in with the whitewash. So this is Tamiya flat white, XF, I'm assuming it's XF2, and it's thinned with just 70% alcohol. This is going to make it easier for the water to get through the paint onto the hairspray underneath. So not completely opaque. You can see just spraying there over the swastika. It's not completely opaque. You can thin it in you know, high wet areas such as leading edges, wing roots, that kind of thing. But looking at photos of the real aeroplane, the winter whitewash, it actually hadn't thinned out, it was just chipping off. So I did a fairly opaque coat over the entire airframe. And again, I kind of really emphasise this. Look at the real thing. If not the actual aeroplane, then the same aeroplane roughly the same time. If you can get it from the same unit, then fantastic. If not, doesn't really matter. And just get a flavour of the weathering, how that particular airframe weathers. Now, if you look at some of the photos of this particular aeroplane, this is Hans Philip's aeroplane, he was the Gruppenkommandeur, you'll see that my winter whitewash chipping is more weathered than the one in the photo, but I have seen Bf 109Fs from JG54 with very similar chipping and weathering to mine. So just because that particular aeroplane, when those photographs were taken, didn't look like that, doesn't mean to say you can't use a little bit of artistic license and a little bit of imagination and do the aeroplane a little bit later so it's a little bit more weathered. That's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. But at the end of the day, as long as the Bf 109 did weather along those lines, then I think you're on pretty safe bet really, unless you know for a fact that that particular aeroplane was shot down on that day after those photos were taken. You can't really criticise the modeller for sort of weathering it a little bit more, as long as 109s or that particular aeroplane was seen in that state at one stage or another. So just finishing off the fuselage now. Again, round the nose areas, it was less intense, slightly, just less intense than the sort of the middle of the fuselage. The middle of the fuselage didn't really tend to wear that much. It's not that much traffic, but obviously the nose is, you know, it's right behind the propeller. You have the exhaust there as well, sort of baking the paint. The cowling's going to get warmer than the sort of rear fuselage and tail as well. So it's legitimate to sort of weather the nose a little bit more than the rear fuselage. So you can see how I'm applying the paint. I'm just sort of slowly building it up in thin coats. Now where you leave the paint a little bit thinner, the hairspray effect and the hairspray chipping is going to be much more aggressive. So just be careful when you come onto that stage. I'll be showing you that in just a second. But as I said, I wanted a slightly more opaque finish on this one. Right, really concentrating in this area on the left wing route, because obviously that gets the most traffic of the pilots and the ground crew climbing up. And here, a little bit more of a close-up, so you can see I'm doing a kind of mottled effect and then building up the mottle into quite an opaque layer. Still trying to get a little bit of the underlying colour to come through, not so you can see the camouflage demarcation, but just for that sort of more worn, patchy effect. And we are pretty much done here. There we go, that's the final sort of base coat, if you like. Now for the fun part. So using a soft brush and copious amounts of water, we just start scrubbing the surface, and what will happen is the water will soak through the paint onto the hairspray layer and dissolve the hairspray layer, which acts as kind of like a barrier. Then that dilute hairspray will just effectively sort of lift up from the underlying camouflage colour, and it will bring the white top coat off with it and leaving you these really nice chips. Now, using a soft brush that I'm doing here, you'll tend to get finer, more worn chips, and a little bit later on you'll see me using a shorter, stiffer brush, which is a little bit more aggressive, just to kind of scrub it off a little bit more to get sort of bigger areas. So here we are, going around the nose with that stiffer brush, and that's going to, because it is stiffer, you're kind of scrubbing a little bit harder, and it is a little bit more aggressive, and you can see how it kind of wears through the top coat. And that's it, that's for the chipping. So now it's time for the decals. So rather than gloss coating, I just polish the surface. Gloss coating isn't necessarily essential. What is essential really to minimise the risk of silvering is a smooth coat underneath. However, I'm not going to get any silvering here because I'm going to use the decals from Eduard. So strap yourselves in. Bit of a controversial subject, Eduard decals, but I'll just show you how I got on with them. So you can see here I've done most of the markings already. I'm just going to finish off here with the fuselage cross, and this is quite a good one to use as an example because there is a panel line running vertically down the black area, and also the radio hatch, which has got sort of 3 of the 4 sides under the decal. So you can see I'm just burnishing it down with a slightly damp cocktail stick, what am I talking about, cotton bud, and I'm just trying to push the decal into the panel lines, but it is quite stiff, this Eduard decal. So just with the tips of these sharp tweezers, I'm just going to very gently run down the decal and help to push it in the panel lines. Just a little bit more rubbing there, just to push it in. It's had a coat of setting solution underneath, the Ammo MIG setting solution. I'm just going to do the radio bay here. I did struggle really trying to find the radio bay, but I got there in the end. I was a little bit nervous using the Eduard decals, not necessarily because they're Eduard decals, but the riveting is just so fine on the fuselage, I didn't want to lose that detail, but actually they performed brilliantly. So I thought I'd just do this one in its entirety. I could have just sort of chopped bits out of it, but I thought it'd just be useful just to see the sort of timeline of it and how much work I'm actually putting into each individual decal. And then we'll just finish off that with another layer of setting solution, not the solvent, the setting solution. Right, after this is after about 1 to 2 hours, you can see that you can just peel the carrier film away. It's almost in one piece. There are a few little residual bits. There we go, off it comes. And here's some of the other decals. So hopefully, I'm just trying to move it in the light so you can see all the riveting detail there. Some of these decals are actually from Xtradecal, so the grip and commander markings and the badges, and you can see underneath there, and they just behave brilliantly. Right, now for the RLMO2, in the exposed parts of the sort of flaps and slats and things, so a lot of masking required. I did detack it considerably when going over the decals. I didn't want to pull up the decal because remember there's no carrier film on it, so it might be a little bit vulnerable. And of course you can sort of paint it all separately if you like, but I just find it easier on a 109 to do it afterwards. So everything was sealed in with some varnish, and then it was onto the wash. I prefer the sludge wash method on aeroplanes like this that are festooned with rivets. I just find it helps to highlight all that detail. So it's slightly thicker than a sort of normal wash, and it's just worked into all the detail. So you can see me sort of going backwards and forwards and sort of really working it into that detail, just to make sure it's actually getting in there. You can see I've avoided the yellow and the national markings. This tone was for the top. So this is based on Starship Filth from the ammo range of the oil brushes, and yeah, it's just thinned down a little bit, and then this is worked into the surface, and this is a really nice tone. It's fairly ubiquitous. It works with lots of different colours, but it really works on this white. It's actually very, very similar, if not the same, to their washes for winter vehicles. It's a sort of grey-green tone, and it works brilliantly with the white. In fact, it works brilliantly with most aeroplanes actually, or with most colours. It's all blasted with a hairdryer. This is just to speed things up. And then the yellow areas had a sort of orangey brown tone, all mixed up from various different colours. So I tend to do this all the time, is rather than have sort of one colour that goes over the whole model, some of the tones don't necessarily work together, and I like to have a complementary tone with my wash. So that's why I go to the trouble of doing all the different tones for the different colours. Right, once everything is dry, it's just simply polished off with kitchen towel, and cotton buds can get into all those nooks and crannies that your fat fingers won't get into. And I don't use too much pressure here, otherwise there is a risk that you will sort of rub it out of all that detail. It's fairly light pressure. And there we go, going in with the cotton bud to get in all those nooks and crannies. And that's the wash removed, and it highlights that detail really nicely. It's quite subtle, but it's really nice. Okay, I think this is my favourite stage now, and this is spraying on the matte varnish. It's actually satin varnish from VMS, but it gives a really nice sort of flat but smooth sheen that's got a little edge to it, and it's perfect. Canopy going on, so this was all painted separately, mainly because the colours were different. As you saw in the previous episode, I glued it all together in a wanna because this is going to have the canopy closed. I think it's nice with the contrast with the canopy with the whitewash with it closed. Now for a filter. So using the Starship Filth, it's heavily thin, so it's almost like dirty thinners. And then this is brushed over the whole surface. What this will do is just sort of tone everything down and bring everything together. This is why you need a sort of a flat finish, so this very thin wash filter will soak in to the paint, and it gives a really nice tone to the whole thing, especially in this scale. Pigments now, and obviously this is operating in the field, so I got these little sort of earth tones, and just wanted to do a little bit of discoloration by the tail, as if some sort of mud has been chucked up. Now I suppose you could argue that it would have been frozen, but maybe this is later on and spring is just about arriving. I've done the main undercarriage, the wheels as well at the same time. Now using black I'm going to do some streaking. So you notice here I'm not using the actual applicator brush. I'm using a very fine brush, and I'm just going to do a few little streaks. We're just going to let that dry, and then we're going to come in and we're going to blend that back. So here we go, moist flat brush with just a bit of thinner on it, and we're just going to streak it back and blend it all back. So simulating oil streaks here from the back of the oil cooler or radiator. No, that'd be the oil cooler, won't it, under the nose? Radiators are under the wings. So maybe a few oil leaks, and it does get streaked back quite badly. And then just going in with the dry brush there, the fan brush, just for the final blend. And don't touch it, otherwise you will leave fingerprints in it. Okay, this is another one of my favourite stages. This is post shading. So I've mixed up a sort of dirty brown colour, very dark. It's very thin, and I'm just going to go over some of the panel lines, just around the nose and the belly, just to increase that dirt. So again, looking at photos of the real thing, you do kind of get dirt, does collect around the panel lines. They sort of stick out a little bit more, if you like, and can pick up a little bit more grime. It's a really nice effect. A little bit, I guess, artistic license, but yeah, I think it really adds to that overall sort of grimy effect. Especially you can see there underneath on that the yellow and the light blue and the white around the nose. So we're getting there now. So that mix I've just used, I just thickened it up with a little bit more black and brown, and it serves well for the exhaust stain. Now, I could have gone absolutely filthy with this. 109s really were filthy with their exhausts. However, I didn't want too much starkness with the white. So again, referring back to photos, you can see the sort of pattern that the exhaust makes. It's a bit odd really. You would have thought it come from all the exhaust pipes, but it only seems to come from the sort of rear couple, and go sort of up and over, but not up too high. Some of the later models with the synthetic fuel later in the war, you know, the fuselages were black, but you know, I didn't want to go too bad. Now we're on the home stretch to put everything together. So this is the innovative mounting for the undercarriage legs. So you can see there's sort of really long tab, and that sits into a slot which is actually the underside of the far front of the cockpit floor, and that sets the angle absolutely perfectly. The tail wheel, so the sort of mounting bar for that was fitted before the fuselage halves went together, and that just simply pops in. The aerial mast, that was drilled and pinned with I think it's 0.1 mil. I think it's steel, might be nickel silver, but I think it might be steel wire actually. Just for strength, because I do have to. This does have to get back in my luggage. And then the final thing is the resin spinner and prop. Plugs on the front. And there we go, all finished. So what I'll do now is I'll just leave you with some final photos. It's a beautiful model. It goes together fantastically, and the number of schemes you can do is, well, it's pretty much unlimited, frankly. So as I said, I'll leave you with photos of this model, and towards the end you'll see photos of the other model that was in the boxing as well. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one. So cheers, bye bye.